The Speckled Band by Arthur Conan Doyle. Retold by Alex Wolff. Narrated by Thomas Judd. Chapter 1. A Sad Tale. The case I am about to relate took place in April 1883, during the early days of my friendship with the famous detective Mr. Sherlock Holmes, when we were sharing rooms at 221B Baker Street. Holmes tended to be a late riser, so I was surprised one early April morning to find myself being shaken awake by my roommate. The clock on the mantelpiece stood at just past 7, yet there was Holmes, fully dressed and in a state of some excitement. "What is it? A fire?" I asked. "No, a client," he answered. "Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, tells me a young lady has arrived. She is waiting for me now in the sitting room. The fact that she's come alone and at such an early hour suggests it's about something fairly serious. I have a hunch this one may prove to be an interesting case, Watson, and I thought you might wish to be involved." "My dear fellow, I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, leaping out of bed. For then, as now, nothing gave me greater pleasure than following Holmes in his investigations, watching as he untangled the knottiest problems with his sharp, logical mind. I threw on some clothes, and a few minutes later my friend and I entered the sitting room. The lady was seated near the hearth, dressed in black and with a dark veil covering her face. She rose as we entered. "Good morning, madam," said Holmes cheerfully. "My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my partner, Dr. Watson. I'm pleased to see Mrs. Hudson has lit the fire. Shall I order you some hot coffee, for I notice you are shivering?" "It is not cold that makes me shiver," said the woman in a low, trembling voice. "What, then?" "It is fear, Mr. Holmes. It is terror." She raised her veil as she spoke, and we could see she was in some distress. Her face was drawn and pale, with restless, frightened eyes, like those of a hunted animal. Although she looked no older than 30, her hair was flecked with silver. Holmes reached forward and patted her forearm soothingly. "You must not fear, madam," he said. "Whatever trouble you are in, we shall soon set matters right. I see you came by train this morning." "How did you know?" she asked. "I spy the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove," said Holmes. "I also know you took a dog cart to the station along muddy roads, and that you sat on the left side of the driver." The lady gave a start of surprise. "Do you have magic powers, Mr. Holmes?" "Not at all, madam. Merely the power of eyesight. The left arm of your jacket is spattered with fresh mud. There is no other vehicle except a dog cart that throws up mud in that way, and only if you sit next to the driver. But enough of this. Please, tell us what brought you here." "Sir," she said, "I am in a desperate situation, and have no one else to turn to. I was recommended to you by Mrs. Farintosh, who you helped in her hour of need. I hope you can help me, too, or at least throw a little light on the darkness that surrounds me. I have no money at present, but in a month or so I shall be married, with control of my own income, and I shall be happy to reward you generously for your time." "Farintosh," said Holmes with a frown. "Ah, yes, I recall the case. It concerned the theft of an opal tiara. I think it was before your time, Watson. I assure you, madam, that I am happy to devote the same care to your case as I did to your friend's. As to money, my work is its own reward. If I incur expenses, you can repay them at a time that suits you. Now, please tell us your problem and include as much detail as you can." "My name," said the lady, "is Helen Stoner, and I live with my stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott. He is the last of an ancient Saxon family, and we live in his crumbling 200-year-old home of Stoke Moran on the western border of Surrey. In his youth, he trained as a doctor and went to Calcutta in India, where he established a large medical practice. But one day, in a fit of anger, he beat his butler to death. He went to prison for a number of years for this before returning to England, a sullen and disappointed man. While he was in India, Dr. Roylott married my mother, Mrs. Stoner, the widow of Major General Stoner. My twin sister Julia and I were just 2 years old when my mother married Dr. Roylott. She had some wealth, which she handed to Dr. Roylott on the condition that he use it to pay us an annual sum in the event of our marriage. 8 years ago, shortly after we returned to England, my mother died in a railway accident. A terrible change came over Dr. Roylott at this time. He shut himself up in his house at Stoke Moran, only rarely going out. When he did, he would engage in fierce quarrels with whoever crossed his path. A series of fights took place, 2 of which ended in court cases. He is a man of huge strength as well as a violent temper, and he became the terror of the village. Just last week, he hurled the local blacksmith over a parapet into a stream. I had to pay the poor man all the money I could find to prevent another court case. "Does he have no friends at all?" I asked. Miss Stoner paused to think this over. "His only friends," she said, "are the local gypsies who he allows to camp on his grounds. If my stepfather has one good quality, it is his kindness to these wandering folk. His other passion is for exotic animals. He has a cheetah and a baboon, which he allows to roam freely through his estate. Because of this, no servant will stay with us, and my sister and I did all the housework. She was just 30 at the time of her death, and her hair had already begun to whiten, as mine has." "Your sister died?" "Yes, 2 years ago, and it is about her death that I wish to speak to you, Mr. Holmes. You understand that we were virtual prisoners at Stoke Moran, with little chance of meeting people of our own age and position. But we had an aunt called Honoria, who lives near Harrow, and Dr. Roylott occasionally allowed us to visit her. Julia went there one Christmas 2 years ago and met a Marine officer. Soon afterward, they became engaged. My stepfather did not oppose the marriage, but 2 weeks before the wedding, a terrible thing happened that robbed me of my only companion." Chapter 2. The Mysterious Death. Sherlock Holmes had been leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed, listening to the lady's story. Now he half opened his lids and glanced at his visitor. "Please be precise in the details of her death, Miss Stoner." "That won't be difficult, because every moment of that dreadful event is burned into my memory," she answered. "First, I should explain the layout of our bedrooms. They are all next to each other on the ground floor. The first is Dr. Roylott's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There are no doors between them, but they all open onto the same corridor. The windows of all 3 rooms open onto the lawn. On the fatal night, Dr. Roylott retired to his room early, not to sleep, but to smoke. To escape the foul smell of his cigars, my sister came into my room, where she remained for some time, chatting about her approaching wedding. At 11 o'clock she rose to leave, but then paused. "Tell me, Helen," said she, "have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of night?" "No," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "Because," she said, "during the last few nights, always at about 3 in the morning, I hear a low whistle. I cannot tell where it comes from. Perhaps from next door, perhaps from the lawn." "It might be the gypsies," I suggested. "But if it came from outside, I wonder why you didn't hear it also." "Because I sleep more heavily than you," I smiled. She shrugged and said it probably wasn't important. Then she left, and a moment later I heard the key turn in her lock. "Do you always lock yourselves in at night?" asked Holmes. "Always. I told you the doctor keeps a cheetah and baboon. I suppose we just felt safer with our doors locked." Holmes nodded. "Please continue." "I couldn't sleep that night. Outside, the wind howled and the rain beat against my window. Suddenly, the noise of the storm was pierced by a terrified scream. Realizing it was my sister, I sprang out of bed and rushed into the corridor. As I did so, I heard a low whistle, just as my sister had described, followed by a metallic clanging sound. I found my sister swaying in the doorway of her room. I threw my arms around her as her knees gave way and she fell to the ground. She writhed like someone in terrible pain. As I bent over her, she suddenly shrieked in a voice I shall never forget. "Oh my God, Helen! It was the band! The Speckled band!" I called to my stepfather for help, and he rushed out in his dressing gown. When he reached my sister's side, she was unconscious. Though he did what he could for her and sent for medical aid from the village, all efforts were in vain. She died without ever regaining consciousness. "Are you sure that you heard the whistle and the metallic sound?" asked Holmes. "I have a strong feeling I heard it, although with the noise of the storm and the creaking house, I may have been mistaken." "Was your sister dressed?" "No, she was in her nightdress. In her right hand, I found the charred stump of a match, and in her left, a matchbox." "So she had time to strike a light and look around her," said Holmes. "Could anyone have got into her room?" Miss Stoner shook her head. "The door had been locked on the inside, and the window shutters were latched and barred, as they were every night. The chimney has iron bars across it, and the walls and flooring were checked and found to be solid all round. My sister was quite alone when whatever killed her struck." "And what conclusion did the coroner reach about the cause of her death?" "He was unable to find any cause of death. The doctors who examined her could find no evidence of poison, and there were no marks of violence on her." "What do you think she meant by this speckled band?" "I've often wondered if she meant a band of people, such as the gypsies encamped on the grounds. Or perhaps she referred to the spotted handkerchiefs some of them wear on their heads. But it may just have been wild talk brought on by her fever." "This is a very murky business," said Holmes. "What have the 2 years since then been like?" "My life has been lonelier than ever," said Helen. "But that changed a month ago when a dear friend, who I have known for many years, asked for my hand in marriage. His name is Percy Armitage. My stepfather has not objected to the match, and we are to be married in the next few weeks. I was extremely happy, until 2 days ago." "What happened?" "Some repairs began on the west wing of Stoke Moran. A hole was made in my bedroom wall, so I had to move into my sister's old room. I found it hard to sleep in her bed, knowing what happened to her. So imagine my terror when, last night, as I lay awake thinking of how she met her end, I suddenly heard, once again, that low whistle. I jumped up and lit a lamp, but could see nothing in the room. I was too shaken to go back to bed. As soon as dawn came, I hurried to the Crown Inn and took a dog-cart to the station to come here." Holmes was silent for a long time, staring into the crackling fire as he thought over what he had heard. "There are many things I still need to know," he said at last. "Yet I fear we have not a moment to lose. Madam, if we were to come to Stoke Moran today, could we look over these rooms without your stepfather's knowledge?" "As it happens, he spoke of going into town today on some business, so he will probably be away all day." "Excellent. Are you free to join me on this trip, Watson? By all means. Then we shall both go. What are your plans, Miss Stoner? I have some errands to run now that I am in town, but I shall return on the 12 o'clock train. And you can expect us in the early afternoon. Will you not stay for some breakfast? Thank you, but no. My heart is lightened already since sharing my story with you. I look forward to seeing you this afternoon. With that, she lowered the thick black veil over her face and glided from the room. Chapter 3. An Angry Visitor. Well, what do you think, Watson? Asked Sherlock Holmes, leaning back in his chair. It seems to me a very dark and sinister business, I said. If the lady is correct that the floor and walls are solid, and the door, window, and chimney are all blocked, then her sister must surely have been alone when she was killed. It is all very strange. There are many elements to this puzzle, said Holmes. The low whistle, the metallic clang, the dying woman's peculiar words. I hope our visit to Stoke Moran will clear up some of these mysteries. But what's this now? We were both startled by the sound of the door crashing open. A huge man stood there. His top hat actually grazed the top of the doorway, and his shoulders very nearly spanned its width. His bloodshot eyes, set deep in his large, wrinkled face, glared at us as a hunting crop swung slowly in his hand. "Which of you is Holmes?" he demanded. "That is my name, sir," answered my friend. "Now, what is yours?" "I am Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran." "Please take a seat, Doctor," said Holmes. "I will do nothing of the kind," growled Roylott. "My stepdaughter has been here. I have traced her. Now, what has she been saying to you?" "It is a little cold for the time of year," said Holmes. "What?" "But I've heard the crocuses are doing well," continued my companion carelessly. "Ha! You are trying to put me off, but it won't work," said our visitor, shaking his hunting crop at him. "I know you, you scoundrel. You are Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody." Holmes began to chuckle. "Your conversation, dear sir, is most entertaining. Now, when you leave, do please close the door behind you, there's a good chap." "I will go when I've had my say," said Grimsby Roylott. "Don't you dare meddle with my affairs. I am a dangerous man to cross. See here." He stepped quickly to the fireplace, seized the poker, and bent it in his huge hands until it formed a U shape. "Now see that you keep yourself out of my sight," he snarled, before hurling the twisted poker into the fireplace and storming from the room. "What a delightful fellow," laughed Holmes. "Well, well, I just hope that no harm comes to Miss Stoner for allowing this brute to trace her here. After that little episode, Watson, I think we deserve some breakfast, don't you? Then I have some business to attend to before we leave for Stoke Moran." It was nearly 1 o'clock by the time Holmes returned from his business. He had a sheet of paper covered with notes and figures with him. "I've examined the will of Roylott's wife," he said, "and I calculate that each daughter could claim an annual income of £250 if they got married. That would put a severe dent in Roylott's wealth, so he had, and has, every motive to prevent them from marrying. The situation has become serious, Watson, especially as the old man is now aware of our interest in his affairs. So, if you're ready, we shall call a cab and go straight to Waterloo. I suggest you take your revolver. That is the best argument I know against a man who can twist steel pokers into knots." Chapter 4. To Stoke Moran. At Waterloo, we caught a train to Leatherhead, where we hired a trap at the station inn. The drive through the quiet Surrey lanes was very pleasant. It was a perfect spring day, with a bright sun and a few fleecy clouds in the sky. New leaves were appearing on the trees and hedges, and the air smelled of moist earth. It was easy to forget, at least for a while, the sinister quest upon which we were engaged. My companion sat at the front of the trap, arms folded and hat pulled down over his eyes, sunk in the deepest thought. Suddenly he glanced up. "Look there," he said. He was pointing toward a gently sloping hill dotted with trees. At the top, appearing above the tree branches, was the roof of an old mansion. "Is that Stoke Moran?" he asked. "Yes, sir," answered the driver. "This road takes us to the village, but if you want the house, it will be quicker to get out here. Climb over that stile and take the footpath through the fields where that lady is walking." "The lady, I believe, is Miss Stoner," said Holmes, shading his eyes to see better. "Yes, driver, we'll do as you suggest." We got off the trap, paid the fare, and climbed over the stile into the field. Miss Stoner, spotting us, hurried over. "I've been waiting so eagerly for you," she cried, shaking hands with us warmly. "All has turned out extremely well. My stepfather has gone to town and is unlikely to be back before evening." "We had the pleasure of meeting the good doctor ourselves," said Holmes, and he briefly explained what had happened. Miss Stoner turned pale with fear. "Oh, dear," she shuddered. "He followed me, then?" "So it appears." "He is so cunning, that man. I don't think I will ever be safe from him. What will he do when he returns?" "He'll need to take care, because there's someone even more cunning on his trail," said Holmes. "You must lock yourself in your room tonight, madam. If he's violent, we'll take you to your aunt in Harrow. Now, let's make good use of the time we have. Please show us to the rooms we need to examine." Stoke Moran was an old stone house with a large central section and two curving wings stretching out on either side like the claws of a crab. Most of it was in a state of disrepair, but the right-hand wing was in good repair, with blinds in the windows and smoke curling from its chimneys. This was where the family lived. Holmes paced the lawn, examining this part of the house. "This, I take it, is your room," he said. "The central one belonged to your sister, and the one next to the main building is Dr. Roylott's." "Exactly so," said Miss Stoner. "But I'm now sleeping in the middle one while they repair the end wall." Holmes studied the scaffolding on the end wall. "I see nothing in particular that needs repairing here. One might almost think it was an excuse to move you to your present room." He turned to Miss Stoner. "Madam, would you please go into your room and close and bolt your shutters?" She did so, and Holmes tried everything to force them open. There was no slit his knife could penetrate to raise the lock. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. "No one could get through these shutters if they were bolted." The first place we examined inside the house was the central bedroom where Miss Stoner was now sleeping. It was a homely little room with a low ceiling and simple furnishings. Holmes took out his magnifying glass and kneeled down to study the cracks between the floorboards. He checked the wooden panels on the walls with equal care. Finally, he went over to the bed. "What's that bell for?" he asked, pointing to a thick bell rope that hung down almost to the pillow. "It's to call the housekeeper," replied Miss Stoner. "It looks fairly new." "Yes, it was put in a couple of years ago." "Your sister asked for it?" "No. In fact, I don't ever remember her using it. We always got what we wanted for ourselves." Holmes took hold of the bell rope and gave it a brisk tug. "Why, it's a dummy," he said. "It doesn't ring?" she asked, surprised. "No, it's not even attached to a wire. It's fastened to a hook just above the opening for the ventilator." "How very strange. I never noticed that before." Holmes continued to stare at the upper corner where the bell rope hung suspended from its hook. "I wonder why there's a ventilator opening in that wall," he mused. "The only logical place for a ventilator would be the outer wall." "That was also a recent change," said Miss Stoner. "It was installed around the same time as the bell rope." Holmes frowned. "A bell rope without a bell, a ventilator that doesn't ventilate. What very odd changes. With your permission, madam, I'd like to see your stepfather's room now." Roylott's room was bigger than Miss Stoner's, but as simply furnished. Holmes wandered around, examining every object. He stopped at a large iron safe. "What's in here?" he asked. "I think that's where my stepfather keeps his business papers." "There isn't a cat in it?" "No. What a strange idea. Why would you think that?" Holmes pointed to a small saucer of milk on top of the safe. "We don't keep a cat, but there is a cheetah and a baboon." "Ah, yes, of course. Well, a cheetah is just a big cat, although I doubt a saucer of milk would satisfy its needs." Holmes squatted in front of a wooden chair and examined its seat with his magnifying glass. "Interesting," he murmured. Then he rose, returning the glass to his pocket. As he turned to face us, his eye was caught by something else. "Hello? What's that?" The object that had snagged his attention was a dog leash hanging from one corner of Roylott's bed. One end of the leash was curled around and knotted in the middle to form a loop. A short wooden handle was attached to the other end. "What do you make of that, Watson?" he asked. "I don't know what to make of it," I replied. Holmes shook his head and sighed. "It's a wicked world, and worse still when a clever man turns his energies to crime." I had never seen my friend look so grim as he did when we left the house. He walked in silence up and down the lawn, and neither Miss Stoner nor I dared interrupt his thoughts. Finally he looked up. "It is essential, madam," he said, "that you follow my advice in every detail. Your very life may depend on it." "I shall do as you advise," she said without hesitation. Holmes pointed to a building on the far side of the road that ran along the edge of the property. "Is that the village inn?" he asked. "Yes, that's the Crown." "Very good. And would your window be visible from there?" "Certainly." "Now listen carefully. You must keep to your room when your stepfather returns. If he asks to see you, tell him you have a headache. When you hear him retire for the night, open the shutters of your window and put your lamp there as a signal to us. Then go quietly to the room you used to occupy. Despite the repairs, I'm sure you could stay there for one night. The rest you can leave to us." "What will you do?" "We'll take a room at the inn. When we see your signal, we'll come to your room and investigate." She stared at him. "You already know, don't you, Mr. Holmes, what caused my sister's death?" "I prefer to have more proof before I speak about that," he said. "Now we must go, Miss Stoner. Be brave. If you do as I tell you, we'll soon drive away the dangers that threaten you." Chapter 5. A Shocking Attack. After leaving Miss Stoner, Sherlock Holmes and I walked over to the Crown Inn and secured an upper-floor room. From our window, we had a good view of the inhabited wing of Stoke Moran. At dusk, Dr. Grimsby Roylott arrived at the house in his trap. The young driver had some difficulty undoing the heavy iron gates, and we heard an angry roar of impatience from the doctor as he shook his fist at the boy. "I fear we may be in some danger tonight, Watson," said Holmes gravely. "Clearly you saw more in that house than I did," I said. "I saw all you did, but perhaps I deduced a little more. There were some very odd things about those rooms. Like the ventilator shaft. I knew that would be there before we came to Stoke Moran. You did? How? You remember Miss Stoner telling us that her sister could smell her stepfather's cigars? That's when I knew there had to be an opening in the wall between the two rooms, however small. But what's the significance of a tiny opening between the rooms, Holmes? A rat could barely pass through it. Yes, and it serves no obvious purpose. That's what bothers me. It's the same with the bell pull, which was put in at around the same time. Also, did you notice anything unusual about the bed? It was clamped to the floor. Did you ever see a bed fastened like that before? I can't say I have. The lady couldn't move her bed, so it would have to be in the same position beneath the ventilator and the rope. I shivered at his use of the word rope instead of bell pull. Yet he was right. It was clearly never meant to be a bell pull. I began to see the dim outlines of a subtle and horrible crime. I only prayed we were in time to prevent it. We stared into the darkness, waiting for our signal. Hours passed, and I began to fear that something had gone wrong. Perhaps Dr. Roylott had broken into his stepdaughter's bedroom. Then, at the stroke of 11, a single bright light shone from the house. "That's the signal!" cried Holmes, springing to his feet. "It's coming from the middle window." A moment later, we were outside on the dark road, a chill wind blowing in our faces, and just that lonely yellow light to guide us to our destination. It wasn't difficult to enter the grounds. The old wall surrounding the property had several breaks in it. After making our way through the trees, we crossed the lawn and were about to enter through the window when a nearby movement made us jump. Something sprang out of a clump of bushes and darted across the lawn. It looked like a hideous little child. "Hell's teeth!" I whispered. "Did you see that?" Holmes seemed at first as startled as I was, for I felt his hand close tightly around my wrist. Then he broke into a low laugh. "That," he said, "was the baboon." I had forgotten about Roylott's strange pets, and I let out a strangled sigh. "Maybe we'll find the cheetah on our shoulders next," I muttered. Holmes was first through the window. After I had clambered in behind him, he quietly closed the shutters and moved the lamp to the table. We removed our shoes to make less noise. "Let's not speak," Holmes whispered in my ear. "The smallest sound could be fatal to our plans." I nodded to show I understood. "And stay awake," he whispered. "Your life may depend on it." I took out my gun and rested it on the table within easy reach. Holmes took the lamp over to the bed. He seated himself there, laying his long, thin cane on the blanket beside him. Next to it, he placed a box of matches. Then he switched off the lamp, leaving us in complete darkness. This was necessary because even the dimmest light would be visible through the ventilator once Roylott extinguished his own lamp. How will I ever forget the dreadful wait that followed? I couldn't hear a sound, not even a breath, yet I knew my companion sat nearby, open-eyed and in the same state of nervous tension. From outside, we heard the occasional hoot of an owl, and once a long, cat-like whine, which told us the cheetah was at large. From far away came the chimes of the church clock, marking each quarter hour. How long those quarters seemed. 12 struck, then 1, then 2, then 3, and still we sat there waiting for whatever might happen. Suddenly, a light gleamed in the ventilator shaft. It quickly vanished and was followed by a strong smell of burning oil and heated metal. Someone in the next room had lit a lantern before sliding a cover over it. I heard gentle movement, then silence fell once more. For 30 more minutes we sat there, our ears strained for the tiniest sound. Finally, we heard it. A low whistle, like a small jet of steam escaping from a kettle. The instant he heard this sound, Holmes sprang to his feet and struck a match. Seizing his cane, he lashed furiously at the bell pull. "You see it, Watson?" he yelled. "You see it!" But I saw nothing. My eyes, adapted to the dark, were temporarily blinded by the glare from his match. What I did see was my friend's face, which was deathly pale and filled with horror and revulsion. He had stopped striking the bell pull and was gazing up at the ventilator when the silence was suddenly broken by the most horrible scream I've ever heard. It swelled louder and louder, mingling pain, fear, and anger in one dreadful shriek. The sound of that scream struck an icy chill in our hearts. We gazed at each other until the last echoes of it had died away to silence. "What can it mean?" I gasped. "It means it's all over," answered Holmes. He lit the lamp and led the way down the corridor. Twice he knocked on Roylott's door to no reply. Then he turned the handle and we entered. In the light of the lantern on the table, we saw the iron safe, its door ajar. Beside it, on a wooden chair, sat Dr. Grimsby Roylott in his dressing gown. Across his lap lay the looped dog leash and handle we saw earlier. Roylott's head was raised, and his eyes were fixed in a glassy stare of death. Bound tightly around the top of his head was some sort of yellow band with brown speckles. "Be very careful of that band," whispered Holmes. I took a step forward, and the strange headgear began to move. The diamond-shaped head and puffed neck of a serpent reared up from his hair and hissed at us. "A swamp adder!" cried Holmes. "It's the deadliest snake in India. He would have died within 10 seconds of being bitten." Chapter 6. The Truth is Revealed. Sherlock Holmes managed to capture the snake with the dog leash noose and stow it back inside the safe. Then we went to see Miss Stoner, who had been waiting for us, awake and terrified in her room. She was horrified to hear of the fate of her stepfather, but I also sensed a great weight had lifted from her shoulders, and that she could, at last, start to feel safe again. She thanked us with all her heart for what we'd done, and in the morning departed for her aunt in Harrow, where she planned to live until her wedding. Holmes summoned the police, and we stayed at Stoke Moran to answer their many questions. We returned to London that afternoon, and on the journey back I asked Holmes how he had managed to work out that the speckled band was a serpent. "Once I knew the bell pull was a dummy and the bed could not be moved, the first glimmerings of the truth began to emerge," Holmes explained. "I realized the rope had to be a bridge for something passing from the ventilator to the bed. A snake seemed the obvious answer, especially with Roylott's love of exotic animals. He must have trained it with that whistling sound to go through the shaft and crawl down the bell rope to the bed, then return when summoned. Julia Stoner heard the whistle on several different nights, so clearly the snake did not always strike. But Roylott knew that sooner or later she would fall victim to its deadly bite. When I saw the safe, the saucer of milk, and that looped dog leash, I knew my theory was correct. The metal clang Helen Stoner heard was the sound of her stepfather hastily closing the safe door upon its deadly occupant. The scuffing on the chair seat showed how he must have reached the ventilator. Once I realized what was happening, I knew we had to be in Miss Stoner's room that night to catch Roylott in the act. As soon as I heard the whistle, I lit the match and attacked the creature on the bell pull, driving it back through the ventilator. The blows of my cane must have roused its temper so that it attacked the first person it saw. You might say I was therefore partly responsible for Dr. Roylott's death. Yet I can't say I feel too guilty about that. In due course, Matters were eventually resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Dr. Roylott's crimes were exposed, and his house and money were inherited by his surviving stepdaughter. The following month, Holmes and I were invited to the wedding of Miss Helen Stoner and Mr. Percy Armitage, and the bride had never looked happier. As for the snake, baboon, and cheetah, I'm pleased to say they passed the rest of their lives quite contentedly at London Zoo.